Okay, Bismillah. I think everything is good to go. Let me just start this backup recording. Okay. So welcome again, everybody, to another session of Lisān Lab, or what I've been calling a semiotic laboratory, or a space where we can kind of experiment with language and the mind, really, and kind of explore meaning and how meaning is formed and how meaning differs in different times and spaces and languages and all that kind of stuff. In short, in a simple sense, at least for me, Lisān Lab is mostly just about recording good conversations. Because I'm passionate about language and the ideas in language and what we can learn from language. And whenever you're passionate about something, inevitably you end up having pretty good conversations. I guess I should share my screen here. Okay, so something else I wanted to say actually is also about Lisān Lab, or about our group and these sessions in general. In that a lot of the idea behind my research and where it stems from within cognitive science and embodied cognition and even psycholinguistics is this idea of grounding. Is that by studying language in this way, you kind of develop a cognitive grounding. You kind of ground abstract ideas in concrete reality. And that's one of the things that I think is the most fun to do in these sessions. But it's not just fun. It's not just kind of aimless playing around. Really, it's about connection between the heart and the mind. Because abstract ideas are in our head, whereas concrete ideas are more something that we relate with our body and our heart. But today I'm going to do something a little bit different. Usually we're just talking about connection between heart and mind, because often, you have these concrete ideas which are related to abstract ideas, and, there's often some kind of metaphor you can say, or some sort of hint or insight into human nature, or at least, because we're talking about Arabic, the mind of the Arab, or at least the historical mind of the Arab. But today we're going to also kind of delve into the body a little bit. And I think this name, which we'll be discussing today, Al-Mutakabbir, which is pretty difficult to translate, I think. I think often what you have happen with translations of the 99 names, and it's just like some way of saying the greatest. That's really all you can kind of manage out of a translation. Some way of saying the greatest of all time, or the greatest in some kind of capacity, or in some sort of frame. So the translation that we have here is the supreme, or the majestic, which I don't think are bad translations, but they definitely don't capture everything here. But yeah, so inshallah today, towards the end, we'll kind of shift into something that I'm very passionate about. I kind of mentioned it in the group a little bit, about sports. Really, sunnah sports is what some people are calling it. But it has a lot to do with connection between the body and the heart and the mind. So I think a lot of times in Islam, as Muslims, as students of seekers of knowledge, we're presented with information that helps us kind of, connect to our hearts, feel something, and then maybe connect that to some kind of intellectual idea or something like that. But often I think what's forgotten is the body, right? And connection with the body. And I think this is especially important in the modern world because, there's a lot of mental health, you could say, or even spiritual disconnect comes from a disconnection from nature and from our bodies. So, inshallah, we'll get to that towards the end. But let's kind of start the way we have been starting with some morphology. Before that, though, does anybody have any thoughts that they want to share on this name or previous sessions or something that has nothing to do with anything that we're talking about at all? Feel free. These groups can be small or large. It's really just about having conversations. So I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts just on the sound of the name, if they've heard it before, if they haven't heard it before, if it reminds them of any other words. If you're not a native Arabic speaker, you might not see the connections between other words right away, but you might hear it. So if not, we can just kind of expand. We can just jump in to the morphology a little bit.
I have a question that I was thinking maybe I can say it in the end.
Sure, yeah, you can say it now or in the end, whichever. Okay, so let's see. So morphologically, this word is a superlative, just like we've had in many other sessions so far. But it's a unique superlative, or at least it's different from the ones that we've come across so far. So the ones that we've come across so far are, of course, like fa'lan, like Rahman. That's usually kind of the most extreme superlative or the most extreme case of intensivity or extremeness of action in a word. So that's fa'lan. And then the more common one is fa'ala or fa'al. So if you have like fa'ala is the basic verb form. If you double the middle letter, then you get fa'ala, and that's the most common other basic. That's the most other common intensive form, fa'ala. Just blanked out there for a second. So in this case, the base form here is kabura. And kabura means for something to become big.
See, your screen is invisible.
Oh. Really? Let me...
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else can see it, but I can't. Okay. I can see that you're presenting, but I don't see the screen.
One day we'll have a session without any technical difficulties. Is that any different?
Yeah, now I can see.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, back to the morphology. So yeah, generally the form, the way Arabic works is you have a base form, and then if you double the middle letter, you get an intensive form. So if you say like fa'ala, he did something. Fa'ala, he did something like intensely. And then the noun forms of those words are like fa'il and fa'al. So again, it's the doubling of the middle letter. In this case, it's a ba. Another intensive form that you have is this form that we have here, which is mutakabbir, which follows the form of mutafa'il. So without getting too heavy into the morphology, try to follow it just like this. So kabura is a transitive verb. Don't worry too much about transitivity, and all it means is that word requires an object. So kabura shay', something became big, right? That's usually how that word is used. And if you make it intensive, if you double the middle letter and then you get kebbara, so now it's still transitive, but now you're talking about making something big. So kebura, something became big. Kebbara, you're making something big, or something was made big. And then tekebbara is what in English linguistics they call reflexive, but it refers to the subject himself. So it means for somebody to become arrogant. That's the kind of the stages of the intensiveness of the word here. And then one more morphological change happens where we add a meme in the beginning, and that kind of usually indicates causality or instrumentality. So I know there's a lot of technical words here. It might help if we kind of switch to Arabic here. But basically you can see here that we have three main letters, right? Ka, ba, and ra, and those letters are found here, ka, ba, and ra, but we're adding a couple letters to the beginning here. So first is the ta, and then is the meme. So if you don't really care about morphology at all, you don't really want to get into Arabic and learn these kind of stuff, it's not a problem at all. The Arabs kind of simplify this in a simple sense of saying the more letters that you add, the more meaning that you get. And generally, when it comes to morphology, but even outside of morphology, the ta and the meme are very common prefixes and infixes that we add to words to change the meaning. Meme we've come across before, like when you say mu'min or Muslim, right? That those words come from Islam and Iman, but the meme there indicates some kind of causality or some kind of instrumentality. The best example I think is darasa, which means to learn something or to be taught something, and then you say madrasa, right? That is a school, right? So that's a place or the cause of learning. So that's kind of all we really need to get into morphologically. I can add some more references and some tables that will kind of help make this a bit clearer in the group chat. So now if we move to the root, switch back to English here, just to kind of see where the translations are. Some of the translations for these words are not always going to be great, but it's always kind of nice just to kind of just take a look at them quickly here. But like I said, yeah, some of these are some strange translations. Grind, to be eroded. But we can always click on the word to see what the definition that lane has is. So it looks like there's some mistakes here with the color coding. So let's switch back to Arabic, just so we can show the base verb here. So kabura right here is the base verb, and it means he was or became great or large in body. Just some other words here because this is a very common root. So like when you say Allahu Akbar, for example, right? That comes from this root. And Akbar here, morphologically, it's the form of I'm forgetting the linguistic term, but it just means more. So like if you say Akbar, Akthar, it means bigger. It's the ER, it's like the ER in English basically. So bigger, or Akthar means greater in number, etc. What are some other words? Kabir is another common word that you hear. I imagine you probably have it in Urdu as well, but it just means big. Yeah, that's pretty much it for common words, I think. But this word, mutakabbir, on its own, without the article, without saying el, right, is commonly used in Arabic to mean somebody who's arrogant. So, again, this is another one of the names, like the last session that we had, like the last name that we took, where a name of God reflects a quality or an attribute which, with respect to God, is praiseworthy and important, but with respect to human beings is blameworthy and not something that we should have, right? And that's you could translate that as arrogance, maybe. We can see what Lane has here. If I can find the word. Where is Takabbara? Well, while I look for that, so the main question I think that
It's kind of in the third row down, kind of towards the left a little bit. Up from here. Up again.
Oh.
And again, and then go to the right.
Oh, there you go. Thank you.
There.
Yeah, so he magnified himself, or he behaved proudly or haughtily. Yeah, sometimes the graph isn't super useful, especially when there's, see, that word, for example, should be a lighter color to indicate that it's a verb. But yeah, still some bugs in the app here. So yeah, Lane has he magnified himself or behaved proudly or haughtily, and like I said, if you take out the article, if you just say mutakabbir, that is usually used in the sense of arrogance. And if we look at the I think I need to switch my screen settings real quick. Okay, I'll do it that way. If we look at QuranCorpus.com, you see this root occurs 161 times in the Quran with 18 different forms. And we mentioned most of these or some of these already. But if you see here, most of them have the meaning of becoming arrogant or becoming proud. Some instances of becoming big or referring to God, magnifying God, but for the most part, that's the general idea. The idea of arrogance or magnifying oneself more than one is. So I just kind of want to stop there, I think, and kind of pause on that idea. I think it's a very intuitive idea. In some of the previous sessions that we've had, we're dealing with maybe more abstract kind of metaphors. But the idea of pride or arrogance being tied to size, right? In this case, big, the idea of something being big, I think is very intuitive. So it almost doesn't leave us very much to say, right? Because, yeah, it makes sense, if you're proud, then, you're making yourself become bigger. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? I think the question, was there a thought? I heard some noise.
Yeah. So for mutakabbir, like, since it's kind of like this intensive form of like kind of, so here it's kind of like making oneself more arrogant or kind of inflating oneself with pride. But then if you look at its root, like the shared root with kabir, right? Like, and it's kind of, so maybe it's like so how I'm interpreting it is kind of like more about kind of making oneself or something greater. So kind of, and actually the link with increasing in mass is interesting because I think when you think about mass, like mass is something that exists in space and time, and everything like acts upon mass. And so when something changes mass, then like surely it experiences time and everything differently. And so in that, it's kind of like, I think it's kind of the pride is like the lower dimension of what happens maybe with this verb, and instead it's kind of just about like the one who's invoking this name is kind of like being helped by Allah to um become greater than whatever they're stuck in, or kind of even greater than their own obstacles and inner blocks, and inner patterns and things like that. And so you're kind of almost like being transformed and kind of transported almost from one kind of like timeline into something else, like a different pattern, a different kind of version of yourself. And so maybe it's not really like you're protected from arrogance and stuff, because arrogance is really like you puff yourself up, but it shrinks you in your essence, in your soul, right? Like it kind of makes you a smaller being, like in just a way of like becoming more inferior. Like it kind of erodes at your essence, and at your soul. And so you're kind of being protected from that, and instead like you're calling upon the one who makes himself greater than whatever it is that you're facing, and like also can make you greater and kind of free you from whatever you're stuck in.
Okay. Yeah, I think I see what you're saying. I think what do you mean by it makes you small? I didn't catch exactly where you're coming from with that. What did you mean? You mean the
I
name
think like
itself, or invoking the name?
no, I mean just just being prideful and being arrogant in general, even if you're like with whether or not it's like in relation to the name, which it can't be in relation to the name because that's literally what that the name is about. That you can't be arrogant, but like in general, arrogance is kind of something that kind of spiritually erodes you, right? And so it makes you like the more stature you gain in the material realm, like it kind of shrinks you more and more on the inside and like spiritually, and it makes you more just hollow on the inside. Like it kind of like is degradation for your soul.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very important subject, and also a very kind of delicate subject at the same time. I mean, we all heard, the hadith that say nobody enters heaven that has even, an atom's weight or a mustard seed's weight of pride in their heart, right? Um, but I think it's also delicate because that doesn't mean, and this is my understanding of Islam. So I don't mean to impose my ideas, and I'm curious what other people think, but it doesn't mean for us to make ourselves, like beggars, right? Or like, it doesn't mean to debase ourselves, right? It doesn't mean to not having pride, or I think what's meant really is arrogance, right? And I think this name kind of captures an idea that's present also in English, right? Because in English we say somebody is proud, right? We could say somebody has pride, but it's not necessarily always a bad thing, right? Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. And I think that's reflected here, right? Because pride is sometimes good, sometimes bad. It's a matter of degree, right? It's a matter of, I think in the Quran, um, the phrase is describing people that have pride or arrogance, and the phrasing is that they have a kibr, right? Kibr is the base form, is the base noun, which refers to pride, exceeding pride, or arrogance. So I'm forgetting the ayah in the Quran, but the idea is that they have a kibr in themselves that they don't reach themselves. So the idea of of pride here is really kind of very simply just like a bigness, right, or a largeness, or an inflation. And Allah says that some people have that, kind of like what you're saying, Maham. And in reality, they're actually small, right? But they have this kibr inside them, this arrogance inside them, this largeness inside them that they themselves are not reaching. Um, but yeah, I think the interesting question for me is like, well, what is good pride, and what is bad pride, right? I think that's kind of the heart of the matter for me, and has always kind of been, because it's a balance, right? Like I said, I don't think Islam instructs us to debase ourselves or to make ourselves, poor and lowly. Um, there are many cases in the Quran, in the Hadith and in Islam and in the Sunnah where we should take pride in ourselves, right? We should take pride in our appearance. We should take pride in the way we dress, the way we smell. Um, uh, One of my favorite hadith is where the Prophet ﷺ says, "Whoever has hair, he should honor it." Right? And this speaks kind of to, I think, the beauty of Islam in its vastness and its comprehensiveness. Right? We have a Prophet ﷺ who tells us to even take good care of our hair. Right? Put oil in it, take care of it, uh, make sure it looks good and presentable. So I think that's a life struggle, is finding that balance between um, uh, your estimation of yourself, right? How big and how small should you really be? And I think that's kind of one of the ideas that I get um, from this name. We can look at what Lane has in the entry here, which is kind of interesting, and then I'm gonna kind of shift into what I was talking about with the body, mind heart body connection. Unless anybody else has any thoughts, but Lane has a cool entry here actually, which we can take a look at.
Um, I was wondering if we can connect this name of Allah with Al-Basit, which I found to be translated as the extender.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts that you want to share? I mean, I think when it comes to language, you can connect anything to anything, right? Because all
Yeah.
sounds are related, but everyone has different perspectives uh, uh, and views of the world. So that helps in our understanding of language.
For example, I found the translation for Al-Mutakabbir. Actually, the way you pronounced it was the first time I heard it right. Um, I didn't pronounce it right so far. And the translation is the one I found is the dominant one. And I think it's very interesting considering everything you told us so far that um, related to the magnifying and increasing and being proud, that there's a translation out there as the dominant one,
Yeah.
which I think somehow would imply that the proudness is assimilated, and we talk about dominance. Dominance is when the virtues are integrated, assimilated, and it's more of a capacity. Um, in this case, divine capacity to assimilate pride in a righteous way, in the correct way. Circling back to what you were talking before about pride and everything.
Yeah, I think that aligns well with what Lane says here. Um, so yeah, we can just take a look at it real quick here. So he says it's an epithet applied to God. And again, just also to add, yeah, I think dominant is a good. I think this is going to be, at least so far, we've only done 9 names. I think this name is the most difficult to translate, because if you take the article away, if you just say mutakabbir without the al, that always in Arabic means arrogant, right? It's always said in a negative sense, right? And but once you add that article on there, the alif and lam, the al, right? Al mutakabbir. Now it's a name of God, and now it's a glorified attribute. So Lane here says, the great in majesty, the most excellent of beings. who has rights which no other has, similar to what you said. The possessor of power and excellence, the like of which no other possesses, also similar to like what you're saying. And I like the last couple of sentences he has here. So he whose acts are really good, exceeding the good acts of anybody else. So again, in also a kind of sense of dominance there. But this sentence I think is kind of interesting. So he says, "He who disdains having the attributes of created beings." So it's kind of an aspect that we haven't come across at all, I think. And I will look up where he gets this from. Taj al-Urus. Okay, so that's yeah, one of the most common dictionaries. But I'm curious who said this. So the idea of Allah is the one who disdains having the attributes of created beings. So in other words, right, it's a name that kind of shows that it kind of reflects a common saying that we say about Allah in Arabic, which is "Laysa kamithlihi shay." Right? There is nothing that is attributable to Him, nothing that is like Him. There is nothing like God. Or also we say "Walillahi al-mathalul a'la." Right? Like whatever kind of metaphor or description or likeness you try and use to describe God, God has the most high example, right? Like so, whatever you think of, whatever you try and think of to imagine God, just know that Allah is higher than even that, right? And as I think this sentence here kind of captures that as well, because like we describe Allah with attributes and descriptors and words that we also use for human beings, right? Like Sami' Basir, He's all hearing, He's all seeing. We also hear and see, but Allah's seeing, Allah's hearing, Allah's doing is not anything like that of human beings. So I think that's a kind of a really unique and interesting way of looking at this name, because I don't think any other name has that kind of sense to it. And I think it also ties into the next sentence that he has here really as well, which is "He who magnifies himself against the proud and the exorbitant among his creatures." So, of course, there are proud and arrogant people in the world, right? But Allah is kind of like, with this name, in a way saying that, like, of all the people that have, or all the entities in existence that have pride and self magnification, Allah's pride and Allah's self magnification is the most justified. Nobody else's pride or self magnification is in any way as justified as God's pride. So,
Do you think that we could, this name in particular, can be appreciated through contrast more than through our own perception of pride, for example? Because, so I'm thinking, while, for example, al-Basir implies seeing more, having a capacity of seeing more than we could. So it implies magnifying something we already know. I was thinking if this name can shines through comparison, meaning we have mutakabbir, so we are mutakabbir, which is a bad thing, but in contrast with al-mutakabbir, in contrast with our mutakabbir, is glorifying, but in a weird way, based on, sorry to repeat the same word, contrast, because it's the best one I've got so far. And so basically, like showing us that an attribute can be good, can be the best, can be highlighted, even if to us it's not, like referring to one another.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, if you kind of think of it in the same sense of this sentence, it's like no one will ever have as much pride as Allah, right? You can kind of think of it that way. No matter how much pride we have, if we have too much pride, obviously that's a bad thing, right? But even if our pride is justified, or anybody's pride is justified, it's never going to be greater than the pride that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, right? It's never going to be greater than the pride that is justified for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think this also touches on, another idea of like, God having a persona, right? Or God having like a kind of personality. God is not a person, obviously. He's far from anything physical or far from anything human. But God does have, an attitude in a kind of way. And that's especially, I think, evident in the Quran, in the tone of the Quran. But, we also have a hadith which say that, like, God laughs, for example. I think all of these things kind of maybe help us to, formulate an idea of God that's more relatable, that's more, it's easier to connect to, right? Because, God, like we said, is not a person, but we can connect to Him, and we can find support from Allah, in the same way that we find support from each other. Obviously, the support from Allah is greater and more powerful and more lasting and permanent than the support that we can get from anybody else. But it still functions at the same human kind of level.
Do you think we can educate ourselves from His attributes? And why I'm asking this is, so pride for us implies many things, some of them including not being able to forgive someone, or to say I'm sorry, or to give a second chance, or to, I don't know, discuss, or this is just on top of my head. But he's Al-Mutakabbir, and he's also Ar-Rahman, and he's also Al-Wadud, so he's also like all these things that we were in a state of pride. We cannot access them because of the nafs or ego, and so I'm thinking, do you think is this practical usage to educate ourselves from the attributes, or should we just keep, maybe this is more of an ethical question, I suppose, should we just keep them to glorify Him, or that's all, and it's more than enough? But I was just thinking if we could learn something, not that we would ever achieve this greatness, I mean, no way, but just to integrate the idea that we can have pride and also be merciful, and just, like, these things can coexist, and they can also like establish an equilibrium between our egos and our hearts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that question it's tied directly to the goal and the heart of these sessions, right? Because it's a bit of a philosophical aside, maybe, but in philosophy, traditionally you start with metaphysics, right? And then you can kind of go into epistemology, and then ethics, and maybe aesthetics and politics and stuff like that. But you start with what we start with the metaphysical, right? Like what is physically real, and then how is that related to the abstract world, right? And then from there we can get an epistemology, which is how do we know what we know, right? So like, forget everything I just said about philosophy, and just kind of think about this in a very simple sense, right? Like, what is pride? How do we know that pride is a thing, right? And this name shows us that it comes from our perception of size. I think there's something that I mentioned a few sessions ago in cognitive science. There's something called the cognitive homunculus, I think, or maybe it's the embodied homunculus. I think shared some pictures in the group about this, but basically it's cognitive scientists doing some research to kind of try and see how do we conceive of ourselves within our own minds, right? And this image that they came up with, right, is mostly the hands and the head, right? Because that's when we think of ourselves, when we imagine ourselves, really, that's the those are the most like those are the biggest parts of ourselves that we imagine in our head. So yeah, so I mean that's kind of been the whole goal of these sessions, right? Like with the very first session, like what is mercy, right? How do we know that mercy is a thing, right? Well, it's tied and grounded in language with this idea of a womb, right? And then we moved on to a king or majesty or something like that, right? And that was attributed to like the physical aspect of grasping something. And then we went to Qudus, right, which is the idea of being holy, right? And that came from the idea of moving far away from something or separating something very far away from something. And Malikul Qudus as-Salam, right? And then we talked about Salam and Mu'min and Muhaymin, all really kind of being similar in them having to do something with like peace and faith, having something to do with safety, feeling safe in one's body, right? So we're always tying physical ideas to metaphysical ideas, and that helps us ground ourselves, I think, to answer your question. So I don't think we can just use the names or anything really, any kind of language in Islam. I don't think we just use it just to praise God or just to worship, but also to help us understand the world and ourselves. So I feel like
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm talking a lot this session, but let me kind of try and shift a little bit into what I wanted to talk about, or what I mentioned I would talk about earlier, which is connection with the body. Right, because I think it's relevant here, right? Because we say that pride in Arabic, and it would be useful to look at other languages and see what the etymology of other languages. I don't know what the etymology of the word pride is actually. There might not be an etymology, or there might not be much information on on the origin. But it would be kind of an interesting open question.
Maybe there's a raised
Can I?
hand.
Yeah, can I say something?
Oh, sure.
So I think the word aggrandizement in English and French kind of come close to mutakabbir, the one who is making himself bigger. And for human beings, it is a sign of arrogance, it's ludicrous. But for Allah, he is omnipotent. He can actually do it, and it is within his powers. So for him, it is not arrogant because he can actually do it. For us, arrogance is being proud of something that we had nothing to do with.
Right.
That doesn't really inherently lie within us, which actually nothing does, right? Nothing. Everything is a gift from Allah. There's nothing that belongs to us. The separate us, there's nothing. All of it is a gift from Allah. So I think the word, like anagram, baraka, of kibr, of this pride, of bigness, size, like it's a blessing. We have some size, but even in our life, we see it change in stature, in height, in gaining weight, losing weight, and then as we grow older, we shrink. So it's God shows us that it's really almost beyond our capacity. And the word that I have always been stunned by, related to pride, is fakhr, which is used in the Quran for the sound of the clay pot, of the hollow clay pot, which was Adam's body. Adam being created by Allah Ta'ala, and the hollow sound which Satan made fun of when he threw pebbles, rocks at us, at Adam's body, because it makes that hollow sound. And the word is fakhr. And so the word that we use in Urdu and Farsi for pride is also, it's kibriya, it's kibr, but also fakhr is used more often. And it's coming from that hollowness, which is very a physical form of how hollow our pride is, how hollow our arrogance is, and that the pride in the body, the pride in taking care of our hair or hands or putting henna if we are women, that is more like being grateful to Allah Ta'ala, being grateful to Allah for His gifts and taking care of them the way it behooves to take care of all of Allah's gifts. Does that make sense? I mean,
Mashallah,
but I'm not
yes.
being, but kibr, I think is like, it is an inherent idea of ourselves. And as in cognitive science, the children develop that sense of themselves through their mother's eyes, looking at themselves in the mother's eyes. That's Lacanian psychology, and I think the mirror, the first, and then they look at the mirror, and we see that they don't really know who that is, and then slowly they start realizing it is themselves, but they think that the image in the mirror is more powerful than they are.
Right.
And
No.
I think that has something to do with our being humans and Allah being who He is, and He has created us to be His mirrors. So there's something very primal in that first encounter with the mirror, whether it's a physical object mirror, because we can think of some tribes where they don't have a mirror unless it's looking at themselves in a water. But it's the mother's eyes or the parent's eyes or the caregiver's eyes, the eyes of somebody who loves you, where you're that close that you can see yourself in the other's pupils, which is also Anul Insan. Like the word for, as far as I know, because this is not my first language, that the word for pupil is Anul Insan. So, and to me that seems like a kind of affirmative for this intuition, Lacanian cognitive science, psychological intuition, that it is through the eyes that we start recognizing ourselves. So so this thing, the idea of the head, because we are so much in our head, and maybe a little bit of the feet as well, because we walk, and hands, because we do we do things with our hands that occupies so much of our brain, I guess. In the mind, so much of the receptors are more for these parts of the body. But thank you so much. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
I've been loving the session so far, even though I haven't really caught up with all of them. But bless you. Thank you so much.
No, alhamdulillah, thank you very much. I mean, the sessions don't have too much continuity, so feel free to jump around. And there was some audio issues with the last couple of sessions, but I think going forward we should be okay, inshallah. No, beautiful points, mashallah. Yeah, I may be overcomplicating the idea here, but I think there's definitely a lot of beauty in this name here. We mentioned last time that there are two types of names generally. The scholars kind of divide them into like beautiful names and names of power, or jalala, might. So this is one of those names that would be considered a name of jalala or might, not one that would be considered one of like beauty and peace and faith and hope. But yeah, one thing that came to mind when you said that, I think we said it a couple of times in a few different ways now, but Allah is the most justified, in His pride. And I heard something recently where like, how can the human being have any pride really, or arrogance, right? What what gives him any right to do that when he came from two private parts, right? Like he came from the father first, and then he came out of the mother. And there's many stories in
I think that also speaks to the humor of Allah
yeah,
for
yeah,
me. You know, the fact that we come out of there, the sources of pleasure being right there.
yeah,
For me, it's always been, oh my God, God has such a sense of humor.
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
So
um,
he does have a persona
yeah,
and a very lovable, like in some senses, for us, a relatable persona, though of course there's something that we just absolutely cannot relate to.
yeah. It's something that's difficult to relate to other people or share to other people because it's such a personal feeling that we get from Allah. Like
Yeah,
we can't even explain it sometimes, but He'll make something happen right before us, and it's just like
yeah,
wow, nobody else could have seen that or done that,
absolutely.
and
Absolutely. And the
that
way he responds sometimes, if we are up to it, if we are aware of his responses, for me, they maybe because maybe he appears to us the way we are. I'm not sure, but he has appeared like he responds, and it's really with a sense of humor
yeah,
that I laugh and I smile and I feel he would be smiling back because I would say, okay, point received, Allah Ta'ala. I got the lesson and thank you so much. But, you really set me right or you humbled me in a very funny, nice way.
yeah. I
Just to
think
complete, I'm sorry, I'm
no,
so sorry.
no. Go ahead, go ahead.
Just to complete the story of and what Huma said, one time I was having such a rough day and I was walking down the street and I was thinking, I had one of those anxious thoughts. I was thinking, oh no, I feel so alone in the world. Like, I swear to God, that minute, like that second, I got stung by a bee.
Ah,
And, and it
Subhanallah.
hurt so bad.
I think,
I jumped and I started laughing. I said, Allahu Akbar. I
yeah,
swear, like, nothing can compare to this. That was such a, like, oh, okay, you think that? Okay, let me show you that.
Yeah, subhanallah.
yeah,
That makes me think of Allah's name, Al-Latif, right? And that's
yeah,
I think
Yeah.
my favorite name of Allah, and it's also a name that the base word we use colloquially in Arabic, and we say it to somebody that is like funny or somebody that's like
yes.
lighthearted
In
or
Urdu, we call a joke a latifa.
Latifa.
oh
Yeah.
wow, okay, yeah, I didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, that's yeah, mashallah. I always learn a little bit more Urdu
But
in these
in
sessions.
Urdu, we have lost the sense of the subtleness. But maybe the whole thing of a joke is anchored in its punchline, which is subtle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have to follow along,
You have to
and
follow along, and
yeah, yeah,
there is a subtle point. Otherwise, it's too much on your nose.
yeah,
Then there's no joke in it.
yeah, yeah. Latif, yeah. Mashallah.
You actually get a sense of like almost like dark humor, but not like in a blameworthy way at all, obviously. But I
Right.
always get that sense like there's like a sharp, like kind of like dark humor to the way that Allah responds and the way that He kind of even like in like in the hadith where it's like there's a servant and he's completely in despair and he's lost hope, and then Allah laughs at him and and it's like why does He laugh? Is because my servant's lost despair, but he doesn't know how close he is to his salvation or him becoming free. And that's like just to think that I'm like bawling my eyes out at a given moment and Allah's just laughing at me.
Yeah.
Like it makes you laugh too.
Exactly, exactly. So my personal experience was, one of them was in Konya. The first time I was walking towards Maulana Rumi's tomb, and one of my sheikhas in California, Mevlavi sheikha, had told me, take lots of Kleenex with you, you'll cry a lot. And while walking there, I confessed that I felt really sad, and that the Turkish people walking all around, they can't read any signs. Like the doors had beautiful names, Babe Khamosha, Babe Darwesha, Babe, whatever. And in Farsi, these are very beautiful, exquisite names. And I was feeling sad that because of Ataturk's playing around with the language, the Turkish people at this point, most of them can no longer read Arabic script. They can't read Osman Lab, they can't read Farsi. And I thought, I am not going to cry because this whole stupid, it's not a living dargah anymore. It's now a museum. We'll have to walk to a turnstile. So what is there to cry about? And I was feeling sad. And I think maybe also pity and maybe also fakhr that I can read them because and I needed that lesson but I resisted looking inside the compound. So I'm walking around the large walled compound and towards the one entrance gate to the museum with the turnstile. But immediately before this I noticed three people stopping at one of those long gaps in the concrete wall and doing a fatiha. So I thought, okay, I should stop and see whose resting place is that? You know, just out of curiosity, and I stopped. And it wasn't a resting place, but it was a memorial plaque to Allama Muhammad Iqbal, who is a Pakistani poet laureate. He kind of gave the idea of Pakistan. He is actually a Kashmiri, where I am from, and he was my grand uncle's best friend. And my father had once told me that if he's a Muslim, it is because of Allama Iqbal's poetry that he is a Muslim. That is what really made him a Muslim. Although, of course, we are born in a Muslim family and all of that. And I started crying because it just my heart broke. It just burst open because that was what I needed to see to come out of my little bubble of arrogance that I can read it and other people can't really, and how sad it is because the power of spirit, the power of barakah, is so potent that no human laws, museumification could actually curb the years of devotion and spiritual energy that is centered in that place. And I thought, Allah, I got your lesson. You were absolutely right. Thank you so much. Lesson received. Tick back. Thank you so much for breaking me open. And then after that, I was just crying throughout my visit. So I did need a lot of Kleenex.
SubhanAllah.
And my apologies. I need to leave very soon for another appointment, but I will catch up with the rest of the lesson through video then.
No problem
And
at all.
bless you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing.
My pleasure.
Mashallah, yeah, that's yeah, lots of thoughts there, but we're going a little long, so maybe I will just cut to the chase here, and then if there are some other ideas that are really stuck that I need to get out, I can share them later in the group, inshallah. But what I really wanted to discuss today was this idea of connection with the body. Like I said, we are usually talking about abstract and concrete ideas in language and how they become paired with each other. And I think that helps us gain like a cognitive grounding. In a simple sense, sometimes I kind of think of like, as human beings, we are like information processing machines, really. We're kind of like computers in a way, just much more advanced and sophisticated and faster. We can process a lot more information at once, but in a different kind of way. Not obviously like ChatGPT or LLMs or stuff like that, but we process different kinds of information, past, present, future. But what helps us, to do that is having strong belief system. And that's a lot of what these sessions are about. Understanding how do we know that these concepts are actually, how do we ground these concepts in reality. So that's all about mind-heart connection. Now, how do we connect the body? Well, that's a large subject, and I think that's one that's very closely related to mental health and spiritual growth. And I wouldn't say that I'm in any kind of I don't have any qualifications to really give much advice in that domain, but I think we can lean on the Sunnah here very, very much. And that is in what's something that a lot of people are calling or I've seen a few people call sunnah sports. So sunnah, if you don't know, whoever's listening, is the word that we use to describe the way of the Prophet. I think actually the root of sunnah, or the etymology, is related to teeth. Sinan is a word that we use for teeth. So I think the idea is a pattern, right? So we follow the pattern. When we say sunnah, the sunnah of the Prophet, we say the pattern or the methodology or the manner of the Prophet. And that's what we follow. And within that sunnah, within that tradition of the Prophet, he has recommended to us many different things. And Islam is such a comprehensive religion. We have a saying for when we enter the bathroom. We have a saying for when we enter a place of worship. We have a saying for when we go to sleep and when we wake up. And of course we have 5 prayers throughout the day. And a lot of these things help ground our heart and our mind. But when it comes to the body, the Prophet ﷺ, he gave us some very interesting prescriptions, right? And I say interesting because they're actually very common, but you don't really find a lot of religions or a lot of faiths that talk about God and spirituality. Excuse me, that talk about God and spirituality and the heart and faith, but then also bring in these things here. And what are these things? So the Prophet ﷺ said, teach your children 4 things, right? And those 4 things are swimming, marksmanship, horse husbandry, and wrestling. So this is something that I'm very passionate about because, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, these things were very, very common, right? And they were essential to daily life. And obviously they're essential to physical health, right? But physical health is essential to mental health. And mental health is obviously related to spiritual health and spiritual growth. So all of these things are related. A simple goal in Islam really is to connect the heart and the mind. But it's to activate the soul, right? So I think when the mind and the heart are aligned, and the body, then the soul is activated. And then when we're disconnected from our heart, from our mind and our body, then the soul is kind of absent, right? It kind of disappears or fades into nothingness. And so that's what we kind of want to avoid. So the 4 prescriptions of the Prophet ﷺ, swimming, marksmanship, horse husbandry, and wrestling, they actually operate on these 4 planes in a really beautiful way, I think. So I actually first heard about this. Well, I'm sure we all have heard about these 4 activities or sports. Some people are calling them sunnah sports throughout our lives, but I've never heard them explained before last year, actually. And I'll share the lecture. It was actually another podcast where I heard this being explained. So the first case is swimming, and really this kind of covers more than just swimming, but any kind of cardio, any kind of cardiovascular activity. And the goal here is disciplining the body directly, right? And especially like with a focus on breath, right? Because swimming and cardio, you have to master your breath, right? You have to get a good hold of your breath in order to continue for long periods of time and build endurance, right? So swimming, we can kind of categorize as just cardiovascular activity in general, and that focuses on balance within the body. So keep that in mind. Swimming, running, cardio, body balance. Now, next is marksmanship. And traditionally, or usually actually, you hear this as archery, right? It's usually translated as archery. And the Arabic word is rima, or ramy. And actually, it is not just archery, but it's marksmanship. So marksmanship is the more encompassing term, and it's the better translation for rimat. And really, it just means it's the art of throwing from far away, or it's the art of aiming from far away. And that is a marksmanship, right? It's anything from a rock to a rocket, is how I heard it described, which I thought was a beautiful phrase. Because like even just taking a rock and trying to throw it and hit a tree or something like that, you're activating something in the mind for aiming, right? And then also a rocket, because even rocket science, to a degree requires some kind of aiming. But the idea really is it's the art of throwing from far away. And what does this do? This helps for intellectual balance. And as soon as I heard this, it made sense to me right away. But the person who was talking about this, they explained it a little bit more. And they even said that there is some research that suggests that when you're aiming, you're activating the same part of the brain that you're using when you use language. And to me, this makes a lot of sense, right? I think when we're speaking, right, when we're trying to formulate an idea, I think that is a very similar kind of aiming. I was thinking about this the other day, actually. I think when you're in salah, right, when you're in worship, when you're focusing on prayer, right, I think that feeling is actually for me very similar to the feeling that you get when I'm shooting a bow and arrow, or when I'm trying to focus on something, when I'm trying to aim at something, right? Salah in a lot of ways is exactly like aiming, right? You're aiming for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're aiming, you're supposed to pray as if you can see Allah before you, and if you can't see him, then you pray as if he sees you. So marksmanship allows us to balance the intellectual aspect, the mind. So swimming, running, cardio balances the body. Marksmanship, art of throwing from far away, that balances the mind. And then the next one is horseback riding and horse husbandry. And this was also really beautiful to me when I found out about it, or when I heard about it last year, when I heard this explained last year, because the speaker, or the brother that was explaining this, he said that I learned more about my partner and how to manage my kids from riding horses and horse husbandry. Horse husbandry also refers to the practice of taking care of the horse, right? So you don't just ride the horse. That's not the recommendation of the Prophet ﷺ, but it's learning how to take care of the horse, and that involves, I just started taking lessons last year, actually, and that's a whole thing. You have to know how to put the saddle on there. You have to know how to clean his hooves. If you have your own horse and you're taking care of him regularly, then you have to change his shoes and stuff like that. You brush their hair, and that balances. What you can probably guess next is the heart, right? That gives you the emotional balance. And like I said, I'll share in the group the talk where I got most of these ideas from. But there's a lot of interesting little facts here. A horse can actually hear your heartbeat from up to 5 feet away, right? That's like, subhanAllah, that's how God created horses, right? So they have this emotional connection. And the way the speaker was kind of explaining these ideas, he was like, you cannot be fake in front of a horse, right? And this is very true, right? Like when you ride a horse, right, you're not going to get him to move unless you're confident, right? Unless you're absolutely confident. You have to literally kind of envision yourself moving the horse, you have to envision yourself getting to the where you want to go, right? And it's not an intellectual endeavor. You can't talk to the horse and or force him. You really have to feel it, right? And that's where the emotional balance comes in. And horses are also very sweet and loving animals. They are very in tune with you, right? And if you're not confident, if you're scared, they're not really gonna budge sometimes, especially. And they all have their own personalities, right? So some of them might be fun and they'll take you for a ride, but they have their own pride too. And if you're not confident, if you're not emotionally kind of centered, they're not going to listen to you at all. So that's another wisdom that we get from the Prophet ﷺ when it comes to sunnah sports. So swimming, running, cardio balances the body. Marksmanship, the art of aiming from far away, balances the mind. Horseback riding and horse husbandry balances the heart or the emotional center. And then the final stage is wrestling. And wrestling combines all three aspects. It combines the physical, it combines the intellectual, and it combines the emotional. And personally, for me, I kind of expand this to any kind of contact sport, right? Because during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, all they really had, they didn't really have much to do in terms of physical sport other than wrestling. Archery is one example, but actually I think they used to have, before Islam, they used to have these festivals in Mecca, and there were two main things. They would read poetry and they would wrestle. Those would be the two main things that they would do. So wrestling was very, very big. And then even during Islam, during the time of the Prophet Islam, wrestling was very common in the masjid even, right? Kids would be wrestling all the time, and it was structured and well disciplined, and it combines all aspects of all the previous other aspects, right? Because you need physical body balance, of course, right? You need to be able to control your own body, right? But you also need to strategize, right? So you need to use your intellect. You have to kind of aim, or you have to kind of figure out where to grab your opponent, or where to grasp your opponent, or how to move their body. So that aspect is there too as well. And then the emotional aspect is there because you can't get emotional, right? If you become emotional, and this is true for all contact sports, right? In all contact sports where you have to use your body, you have to run, right? And then you also have to, basketball is one of my main sports. So obviously there's aiming in that, as you're shooting the ball into the basket. But there's also aiming involved in the sense of like trying to position yourself, right? So that's an important intellectual aspect. But then the physical, the wrestling aspect, I think, right, is the one that ties all three together. And I think that's prevalent in all contact sports, right? And I think this is something that's kind of like a lost art in Islam, and something that I'm very passionate about. I tell a lot of my guy friends that we should start a Muslim fight club sometimes, half jokingly, really. But I think it's something that's very lacking within our communities, within within brotherhood, and that's a kind of these sports, for one, right? A lot of these things we don't do just as a community, Muslim or non-Muslim. So it would be good, to run more, to swim more, to practice cardio, to practice aiming, to get in touch with nature and animals. But doing these things as a community is important, and I think that's what we find with wrestling. Wrestling combines all three of those elements, and I think that's essential to bodily balance, to having a balanced heart and mind and body, and that's what kind of gives us, to tie this to the name of Allah al-Mutakabbir. That's what helps us find an adequate and accurate measure, an estimate of ourselves, right? Because takabbur, or arrogance, right, is a overestimation of ourselves, right? We make ourselves too big, right? And I think in the same respect, sometimes you can be proud or arrogant and make yourself too small, right? Because I think what happens there is you are, you're making your judgment king, right? You're making your judgment above everyone else's, even above Allah's, when you make yourself too small, right? So a balance is necessary, right? You can't make yourself too big, right? Because you don't deserve to be that big, and you can't make yourself too small because Allah has given you and blessed you much more than that. So language, I think, is essential for that heart and mind balance. But the sunnah sports, the activities, the physical activities that were recommended by the Prophet ﷺ, which give us balance in our body, in our mind, in our heart, and then all three of those combined, I think that's also an essential second dimension that we all need to kind of try and keep in mind. And this includes men and women. It's not something that I think, sports is often designated just for men, or often associated with just men, but that's definitely not the case at all in Islam, and definitely not the case in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, as he recommends us to teach all our children these four sports, or these four activities at a young age too, which is important. I think for myself, I didn't really get into a lot of these things until much older in my life, and that makes it much more difficult, obviously, but not impossible. So it's never too late. Start running, start aiming. Even if it's just throwing a piece of paper in the garbage can, it activates something in your mind. It clicks something, it turns something on. It's a method of grounding, right? I think that's kind of an important point, is that often we might feel down, or we might feel less than ourselves, and the physical activities that we choose to partake in are often one of the easiest ways to get back into our body, to get out of our heads, and to feel life enter us again, and feel balance, both in our spirit and in our minds and hearts and bodies. And that's my little TED Talk there on Sunnah sports. I hope, inshallah, it was beneficial. I will share more resources on this, on the morphology and on the Sunnah sports in the group chat. But feel free to reach out if you have any questions. If there are no more final thoughts, we have a smaller group today. Then I bid you all salam, and until next time, inshallah. Thank you.
I wanted to say, like, I really appreciate that you actually brought this up and you kind of integrated that, because a lot of this stuff, like especially when you were talking about how you felt like salah is like an act of aiming, I realized as you were talking that I had that same sense, but I didn't have the language for it before. Like I didn't kind of make that connection. And yeah, somatic grounding and kind of just kind of coming back into your body, like that's something that I practice like regularly because I kind of have to. And I think that is something that it's become quite big now, because like we're seeing more and more kind of people have that disconnect like with the soul, and that kind of causes like when your body feels unsafe, or when you don't have like a decent connection with yourself, or with a sense of self, like your body becomes more and more unsafe, like feeling to your spirit and to your soul. And that's kind of what dissociation is. It's like when your soul kind of detaches itself a little bit and distances itself from your body, because your body feels like such an unsafe place, and kind of increasing your window of tolerance, and being able to show your spirit and your soul that your body is becoming a safe place, and that is what allows you to kind of re-enter it and everything. And I think that's really important. I think it's like it was a really interesting connection that you made, and it's something that I've been kind of, I think also like when you look at kind of the causes, like this could turn into like a whole discussion, and I'm kind of mindful of time, but I was realizing that even when children don't have secure attachments as children, they really don't end up developing a sense of self, sometimes even physically. And so kind of like a disconnect with one's body, or kind of like a sense of dysmorphia, even if there isn't like food or any other kind of like causes, like even just having insecure connections can cause that. And the less sure you are of your body, and the less you kind of are acquainted with your body, and that's where sports come in, is like they help you to acquaint yourself with your own body. And that's where wrestling also comes in. It helps you kind of, that's why it's such a great bonding activity, because it's kind of like I think traditionally in wrestling there is like a kind of a state of undress, and then physical contact with each other, right? Like, and it's kind of, it really reminds you of the fact that you're all kind of flesh and you're all from earth, and it helps bind you together. It kind of, it forces you to kind of respect each other. I mean, given that there's no, like, injury causing, like, shenanigans happening, but yeah, no, I think it's really important. And it's definitely something that I've been looking into more and more. So this was really nice to kind of talk about it and expound on it. It made me realize a lot of different things.
No, to be honest with you, when I first came across this, I just kind of came across it randomly, and I was mind blown. And it's really like it's stuff that we've heard before, but like you said, I didn't have the language for it. As soon as he said that, aiming, marksmanship, my mind was just like, whoa, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Like, yeah, being in salah, being in worship, it feels like aiming. Shooting an arrow, shooting a ball into a basket. There's a certain kind of concentration and a certain kind of like. I'll share the lecture. It's about an hour long, but he mentioned some hadith in there that are really really powerful, and about archery. There's a lot of hadith about archery. Not all of them are have most of them have some cut chains, so they aren't like common hadith that you would find. But they really kind of equate some of the hadith, they equate aiming and archery as almost like an act of worship. And Yeah, it's really sort of beautiful. I'll try and share some of those references later, inshallah. But yeah, it's a very deep topic, and I think it's one that is neglected a lot. Um, Not, I mean, for many reasons, but I think one of the main reasons probably is that, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or in antiquity, the disconnection between the mind and the body, or between the body and nature, was just less prevalent, right? Because you could not escape the earth, right? You could not really escape your body back then, right? It was just like it was a part of your life. There wasn't really, you woke up and often you were sleeping like directly on the ground. Just a side note here, there's this idea called earthing. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of it before, but it's this idea like of physically grounding your body to the earth. That the earth has its own electromagnetic field, and its own like polarity, and your body has a certain polarity. And when you're disconnected from from the earth, the polarity changes, right? You become like too positive or too negative. I forget exactly. But when you're in direct contact with the earth, you neutralize each other, right? And there's kind of like an electrical balance that happens. But in the modern world, we are, I'm in an apartment building right now. A couple of 30, 40, 50 feet in the air, off the ground, in some way. And often we're in buildings or in cars or, whatever it is. And we are like, physically just not with the earth, which is just something that like is just not, that didn't happen, in antiquity. It didn't happen during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So the emphasis wasn't there because it was a part of life, running was a part of life for them. It was how they hunted. It was how they gathered and how they moved. It was just normal for them. Same with horseback and archery and marksmanship and wrestling. All of these were just a part of their lives, and that's why they didn't really make a fuss about it, or they didn't emphasize it too much. But in the modern world, I think, or maybe in the postmodern world, we should say, because postmodern implies a going back to tradition or going back to the past. I think it's important that we kind of understand our roots, understand where we came from, understand how we used to live, and how moving away from that affects us, at a very deep level. And I think wrestling combining all three is really kind of a beautiful thing. And like I said, I think any kind of contact sport, any kind of even intimacy. I think even intimacy between spouses, right? You can even kind of argue that that is a kind of wrestling, right? And the idea, I think, for me is that when bodies are in motion, right? When human bodies are in contact and in motion with each other, um, that's a kind of grounding for sure, right? That's definitely a kind of reconnection with nature and with the earth that we can find with each other. You might not have horses where you are, but you can still, go hug a tree or, walk barefoot, on the ground. Sometimes it might sound a little eccentric, but it is good for you. It is healthy for you.
There's an expression on social media. Um, I think it says, "You need to go touch grass."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because you're, keyboard warrioring too much or just scrolling
Yeah,
too much, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a modern problem. It's definitely not something that's really been an issue for human beings for most of human history, right? It's only like the past 100 years or so out of the thousands of years of human history that we've been so disconnected from nature, and I think it's time for a revolution. That's definitely how I felt after I watched the podcast, and I'll share with the group, and it's a beautiful how can I say journey or time travel back to a simpler time, I think, and there's a lot of insight and wisdom and beauty there, I think, that we can all benefit from.
Absolutely.
I think that was just a thank you, but I couldn't hear. But yeah, thanks everyone. This is probably the longest session and maybe maybe the most unfocused, but I think an important one and a fun one at that. So thanks again for everyone who shared their thoughts, and for anyone who's listening as well.
It's not gonna hurt, Zibi. This was really nice.
Yep, thanks again everyone. Wa yakum, inshallah. Until next
Jazakallah
time.
khair. It was really great.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much.